Hey, it's Ben. Today I'm filming from a farmhouse in upstate New York. And years and years ago, when they built a lot of these homes, they built them way too close to the road. And so um, I don't know, maybe in those days cars weren't all that plentiful. Maybe you could go for much of the day without even hearing a vehicle pass. And some of these homes are actually built um, before automobiles even. But so we may hear some background noise or something. And I wanted to get some filming in before it got dark. So here goes. So for some time, I've been thinking about working on there's a chapter or article that I've written a lot of content for it, but it's been a very challenging article to create. And there was some years ago, the author Carolyn Mace wrote a book called "Why People Don't Heal and How You Can." And I don't, so many years have passed, and I don't remember if I've even looked at the book other than just seeing the cover or something. But being that, for decades now, for those of you who don't know, I spent years training with a traditional Native American doctor, a medicine man, Horace Delkai from the Kiowa tribe. And so starting in at the age of 20, I began to train with them. And it took me a few years to work myself into it. But at 25, I was graduating from college and starting to really practice on my own. And so doing this work in this culture, I think in many ways it was easier for my mentor because he was living in a culture in which people had some kind of a framework or context for healing. And for centuries, they had their traditional doctors, and many of these individuals just possessed extraordinarily powerful gifts and capabilities. And there were many instances where, like, we would come into Oklahoma, like he lived out on the Navajo Indian reservation with his wife and children. So when we would return to Oklahoma, he would actually have to hide his vehicle in somebody's garage or behind their home. But in many instances, word would get out that he was in town, and people would start lining up to see him. And he couldn't keep a phone because he would maybe give the number out to a few people. He'd say, no, don't share this number with anyone, okay? But then after a while, the number would get out, phone would be ringing off the hook. He would have the phone disconnected. And so for the most part, people didn't really know how to reach him. He would just show up at times, back in Oklahoma. And he was known throughout what's referred to as Indian country. There were reservations strewn out across New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada. In Oklahoma, I think it's around the 1900s, the state officials realized that, wow, if we have all these reservations populated with Native people, then we're not going to have a tax base or a base of tax-paying white folks that we can generate revenue off of. And so they, overnight, with the stroke of a pen, they dissolved the reservations and they gave allotments of land to non-Native people and small allotments to the native people, head of the family and each individual below. And much of that land over the years was either sold or sometimes swindled out of the native people. And this is just part of the ongoing tragedy that native people have experienced ever since Columbus landed in what is now the Dominican Republic. I think it was called the island of, was it Hispaniola or something like that. And but anyway, so after training with my mentor for a couple of years, I parked my ass back in college. Needed some time to reassemble my head, put myself back together. But around 25, I started working with people. And I faced a lot of challenges over the years, especially because coming back into this mainstream culture was a lot of people didn't have any framework for healing, and they had no context really to understand the kinds of experiences that I had training with my mentor. Horace would, at times, he would take portions of his own healing gifts and physically transmit some of these gifts of healing into my body. And it would be, when he would do that, I'd feel this tremendous force impacting me, and he'd have someone standing behind, holding me from behind, because that force was so intense, it would literally just knock me unconscious momentarily. And I would feel that high afterwards, just kind of an altered state. And they'd have me go on the vision quest, Vision quest is where you fast the 4 days and nights without food and water, alone in the mountains. And there's some variation among different tribes, but that's kind of like the basic format, let's say. But coming into this mainstream culture, let's see, first, going to college in Durango, Colorado, then spent a few years in Kansas City, Missouri, and then back to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And gradually I started to work with people. But some of the challenges that I've encountered, what I notice in working with people is that, vast majority of people, I mean, all of us to some degree, we've experienced emotional wounding of one form or another. And in many instances, this wounding goes back into early childhood, even. It's our families of origin. We can have vastly different experiences. Some of us grew up with parents who were very loving, very nurturing, supportive. Maybe we got an easy start in life. I mean, everybody faces challenges of one form or another, but there's also a large percentage of us, our parents were doing the best they could, but they were struggled with their own emotional wounding, or maybe they were just struggling. If we grew up with a single parent who was having to work and at the same time doing the best they could to care for us, and they had their limitations, again, doing the best they could for us. And then some of us grew up with parents that really were not that caring, that were quite abusive. And so, here we grow up with this emotional wounding, but also over the course of our lives, there's all kinds of hardships that we go through, struggling to get through college if we did pursue our education, things like the loss of a job, the death of people that we love, that going through all kinds of devastation in our romantic life. We form attachments to someone, and maybe that person's unfaithful, We get into a relationship and they often don't last. And um, many instances where um, you invest all these years in someone, and maybe even you have children with them, and then find out they're involved with someone else. So there's all kinds of things that happen that people go through over the course of their lives. And when we go through these events, we often take these hits. It can be quite a body blow, and it evokes often very difficult or painful emotional responses. And the challenge for so many people is, we're living in a culture, and I think it's most cultures actually, that we're never really taught how to work effectively with our own authentic emotional responses. In many instances, even as children, we might have been shamed by parents who, you know, they themselves being emotionally illiterate, not knowing how to cope with their own emotional responses. So maybe they denied or dismissed our emotional responses if we felt fearful or angry, or maybe they ridiculed us, or in some instances punished us. And so that compounds it short circuits. Like, we have this innate healing intelligence, and we have these emotions come up, and no, they're not always rational, and they don't always make sense. But as a child, you need, like, your parents to be somewhat understanding and empathetic, and to kind of mirror back to you what you're feeling, and to help you make sense of what you're feeling, and provide some kind of constructive means of addressing those emotions, providing some kind of solution framework that, okay, here's how we deal with sadness or anger or the upset. And it diminishes, diffuses the intensity of that emotion, and and it restores this sense of equilibrium and well-being. And you have a sense of, like, okay, so I can handle challenges that come up, and I can resolve these issues and manage my own emotional states. And but as we grow into adulthood, the fact that a lot of us didn't um, receive this model of healthy emotional expression, how to address a lot of the challenges that we're faced with, and how to, again, manage our emotional responses. So we go through, whether it is like the loss of a job, or a relationship blows up on us, and other hardships, challenges, setbacks, all that. And often we don't know what to do with it. So what happens is we end up numbing ourselves out. We distract ourselves, or we self-medicate with alcohol and other recreational drugs or pharmaceuticals, or we're just doing the best we can to cope. But oftentimes our coping mechanisms, our coping strategies, are just not all that effective. And so what happens is, we go forward, time passes, and we don't resolve a lot of these issues. We maybe reenact a lot of the same dynamics in our relationships, the kind of individuals that we attract into our lives or form attachments to, and kinds of patterns that we reenact in the relationships. But anyway, so what I find is that, much of the population, most of us, we have these emotional wounds that we carry, and we have limited resources with which to address these wounds. Maybe we go in, we talk to a psychotherapist, and for many, that's a very important part of our healing journey. But for so many people, it's like staying up in the intellectual mind, just kind of talking about, analyzing our problems. And it's an important step, but if that's all we do, it's pretty limited. So, so what happens is that oftentimes people will seek out an individual such as myself, if they even know of such an option when it comes to healing. And but in many instances, people just, they'll reach out to me when they're in crises. And maybe we'll do a few sessions. Some people, when we do the work, there are times when it can bring up a lot of emotion. It can bring a lot of these core feelings and issues up to the right into the forefront. And that it needs to happen. This is an important part of the healing process. But if you have individuals who have spent their lives denying, disconnecting, running from their emotions, like, I don't want to go there, I don't want to look at that. The problem is that some of these individuals, when the emotions surface, the emotions and issues are brought to the forefront, they'll bolt. They will disappear. It's like they just don't want to deal with it. You also have the fact that some people will come in for sessions and, yeah, maybe they'll stick around for a while. But what I've seen happen in many instances, they would stay just long enough till the storm blows over. And they'd be like, okay, I'm good now. And yet, whenever I work with people, even just being around people, I cannot help but see into people's bodies and minds. I see and I feel how they're wounded emotionally, what they're carrying in their body. I can just feel whatever it is, sadness or anger, but a lot of times what happens is you think of oftentimes, this emotional wounding in many instances goes all the way back to childhood. And there's this layering effect. We have these, and because we carry these emotional wounds, we tend to attract more of the same kinds of people and situations. And so there's this reenactment. And and with that, there's like a layering of all these different experiences and the same kinds of emotions and stresses being invoked repeatedly. And because people don't digest that, it just layers into the body and it just builds up, it accumulates over time. And all of us, we have this innate core being that resides deep within us. But what happens in so many instances is that deep core of our being, it gets covered over by all these layers of stress and all these emotions, the grief and sadness and anger and frustration, all these emotions that we don't know how to deal with or work with constructively. And there's ways in which, there are times when we're in the midst of a crisis, when the shit hits the fan and things are blowing up. And in those times, we could be under enormous stress. We're in this, we're overwhelmed and we're just consumed by the emotion. But at a certain point, things begin to seem to right themselves a bit. It's like we move out of those distressing periods. And there's this tendency I notice with a lot of people in this culture is of wanting to get to a place where they are comfortable. And so maybe the storm blows over and things settle down a bit. And so you'll have people thinking, yeah, I'm fine now. It's cool. and they just want to go back to what's familiar and just coast. I made that mistake myself. In my 20s, I had a lot of the emotional wounding, traumas of my childhood and adolescence. And I was forming attachments to women who were, in many ways, disinterested, unavailable, sometimes quite hurtful. And there were periods where maybe a relationship was blowing up on me and it evoked enormous amounts of distressing emotion. It was excruciating at times. And instinctively, I just dove into the depths of the pain. But the big mistake I made was I wasn't. I would get through those really bad or difficult periods, and when I was in the midst of it, I'd be doing a lot of practice to the meditation practices I developed to help me work through that. When I had the opportunity, I also worked with some very gifted healers, and that helped me to shift through that. But the mistake I made was that I wasn't consistently doing practice to facilitate the my continued growth and evolution and healing. And so a lot of times people come in, maybe they'll do like uh, one or a couple of sessions and they like disappear. But as I said, the fact that I can look into people's bodies and minds and I see how they're struggling, I see where they're wounded, the traumas that they carry in their body. I feel like the stagnation, all the residual of all those stresses and emotions, often going back for decades that they've never dealt with. And yes, the immediate storm or crises is blown over, but there's a truckload of just shit, just accumulated in their bodies. But they're thinking, "Oh, I'm cool now." Really? And it's sometimes it really saddens me because as I see these individuals that, okay, so they're not in the midst of a crisis right at that point, things have smoothed out a bit. But when I look into people's bodies, what I see is that most people are only realizing a very small degree of their true potential. And and I feel the stuckness. They've only come up to a certain level of their development. And as I look into people's bodies and minds, I also have a sense of like what's possible, about, and so there's always that desire on my part to. It, Now there are stages of healing. The early stages have more to do with, okay, we go in, we address the trauma and these other deeply wounding experiences, and we clean up the stagnation, the internal organs and systems. The internal organs become cleaner and they function better. Their digestion improves and their lung capacity expands and all these things. And so that's more the early stages of healing, but there's also the fact that there are these, we can, as individuals, we can develop to much, much higher levels. And as I said, most people are only realizing a very small degree of their true potential. The other thing I find too is that in working with people in our modern day Western culture here, it can be very difficult getting people to do any kind of practice. I teach this system of meditation practices. I get people into their bodies, connecting with their emotions, those deeply wounding experiences they hold in their body, the stagnation that they're carrying. And I teach them these practices that enable them to activate the innate healing intelligence that resides within their own bodies and minds. And now, if you go in different ancient traditional cultures, like what you find in India and Tibet and China, it's very common. People would spend throughout the course of their life, they would be doing daily intensive practice, often for hours. And then here in this culture, to get people to do any practice, some people will do it. Some of the people that I work with, they will practice consistently and they make far greater progress. Their bodies are much more malleable, responsive to the healing, and they get far greater results than those who don't do practice. But I find that many people, maybe I'll do like 15, 20 minutes or something. And our practice intermittently, like once or a couple of times a week or every now and then, or when things blow up or whatever, but they don't do much practice. And it's tough, it's challenging for me because their bodies not being as malleable or responsive, it leaves it to me. Well, I end up having to work so much harder because their bodies are a lot denser. It's like all that stress, all those unprocessed emotions, the trauma, it just congeals and it freezes up. It's this heavy, thick, stagnant residue that just accumulates in people's bodies. And it's, um, yeah, a lot more work. I have to work so much harder on my end. And and it could take much longer for these individuals to see and experience the profound transformation that those who practice, their bodies are more fluid, more open, and we're able to get deep into the core issues. And yeah, major transformation. And a lot of these people can move very rapidly, dramatic transformation, as I said. In, was it 2002, I began to train with Shifu Li Tailiang in the internal martial arts of Xing Yi Quan, Baguazhang, Tai Chi, Qigong. And these internal martial arts are rooted in Taoism. And there's been this continual process of development and refinement over the centuries. But a lot of these practices, they began to develop them thousands of years ago. And it's fairly common for those who attain mastery in these traditions, they began to train as children, um, 4, 5, 6 years old, very young. And even Shifu Li Tailiang we've had many conversations, and he wasn't all that enthused as a boy, when he was like 5 years old or so. And the training was very intensive and didn't really want to do it. But his father was just extremely high level of development. I mean, his father was around during World War II and literally killed like a handful of Japanese soldiers with his bare hands. I mean, they're armed, the Japanese soldiers, but he was like so fast and had possessed so much power, and could just like take them out in like one or two strikes, and it's yeah, that's it. Game over for them. And but I think he was in his teens or 20s. I mean, he too started training from his own father, who was also an extraordinarily highly developed master as well. But Shifu was telling me about how intensive that training was, just how grueling it was, and train a couple of hours, or I'm not sure the exact intervals, but train for a while, go to school, come back for some break in between, more training, go back to school, more training afterwards, and hours a day. And he is sharing with me some of the accounts of, there was at one point he became like a national fighting champion in China. I mean, he was competing in the competitions. And there were instances where, he was up against opponents that were highly skilled, his other martial arts disciplines. But Shifu's training, um, the internal martial arts, there is a much greater emphasis on developing this internal power where you're constantly drawing this chi or life force into your body, and you're continually building and compressing it and building that force stronger and stronger. And so there are instances where, like, Shifu maybe would like to strike his opponent just once, and his opponent would just collapse into a puddle in the middle of the floor. And the judges sometimes are dumbfounded, and he was telling me that one judge approached him at one point and just says, "What kind of kung fu are you doing?" Even the judges didn't fully get it. But again, it's just that building internal power. And so when I started training with Shifu, at first I didn't get it, the importance of the Qigong practices. But after a while, when I finally caught on, I started spending an hour or two a day just doing Qigong. And even after a while, Shifu would throw a punch at me or something, and I would be expected to utilize what he had shown me to deflect that punch and counter strike. And because I'd been doing all that Qigong practice and starting to build that power, he'd feel this jolt of electricity. And he was like looking at me like, what the fuck? And like he didn't expect me to develop it so quickly. But because I've trained with this Native American doctor and did lots of meditation practice, I had a head start. But anyway, so it's common those who attain mastery in the internal martial arts, they do hours of intensive practice on a daily basis. And people in the Hindu Vedic traditions, these yogis and sadhus and gurus, and forgive me if I don't quite have the right inflection or whatever, my pronunciation's not perfect, but and the Sufi, the mystical Islamic tradition, among Native Americans, all these traditions, the people who developed these extraordinary gifts and capabilities, they all did just hours of intensive practice. Traditional Native American doctors, they, I think, and it varied some. Some tribes, I think almost all the men at some point went on the vision quest, and it varies some, again, depending on the tribe, but something like 4 days and nights, no food and water, alone in the mountains. Some tribes, women would also go and do the vision quest. There's the sun dance where they're fasting without the food and water, but there's other things involved as well, but that's more of a communal activity. But they'd go through these like extraordinarily powerful what do you call it, interventions. And that's the other thing too, is that so you had both. You had these practices that people do, and then they would do these like these interventions. Say, like, Native people work with their traditional doctors, and the traditional doctors, like my mentor Horace and myself, having trained from him, we act as conduits. We have this this presence drop into our body, work through us. I know when I work with people, many instances, people describe feeling this presence around, working around their body. There are times where maybe I'm down at the person's feet or something, yet they feel like another set of hands working with the person in a different part of the body. And people are like laying there like, wait a minute, how, what's going on? How is this happening? He's down there, but who's this other person? And but so those of us who work on this level, we act as conduits, and we allow this extraordinarily powerful presence. Some people have described the sensations, what they say, what feels like surgery happening within the body, where there's this reconstructive process taking place where it's repairing injuries or damage to internal organs, or maybe they feel a sensation of hands working within the body. And here in United States, in North America, in our Wonder Bread culture, most people are unfamiliar with these kinds of healing practices. If you're in Brazil or Indonesia or Malaysia, years ago among Native Americans, when there were still many people practicing on these levels, this sort of thing was very common, but it's, to a large extent unknown or unfamiliar. But when I talk about how people would do the practices, do hours of intensive practice. And I've had people say to me, like, well, who has time for that? And yes, I could understand if you're a single parent and you're holding down a job or two or three, and you're just doing the best you can to survive. And especially young children can be extraordinarily demanding, need a lot of time and attention from you. Totally get that. A lot of times I work with single parents or even married parents and go to their homes, like get there 8:30, 9 o'clock, and we do the session late after their children fall asleep. It's the only time we can work. Other people working their way, surviving through college. And so they're going to school full time and they're working and doing the best they can to survive. You don't have a lot of time. And some, working with people in the financial sector that, working like 50, 60 or more hours a week. And that can be pretty damaging to their bodies, not having that downtime, time to rest. And sometimes their bodies really suffer from it. But a lot of us, we do have time. We say we don't, but we have more time than we actually think. I mean, just consider for a moment, how much time do you spend scrolling on your smartphone? Firing text back and forth. And first thing you do, wake up in the morning, you turn your phone on and you're scrolling through your feeds. And how many times during the day do you do that? And if you add up all that time during, over the course of the day, that could be an hour, a couple of hours, many people, possibly you as well. And how much time do you spend staring into different names for it? The square God, the idiot tube. I'm referring to your television. Binging on Netflix. It's, for the most part, it's a total waste of time. Your ass is parked on the couch, laying in bed or whatever, and you're just vegetating. And it doesn't really facilitate, you may learn some things, but it doesn't really doesn't do anything to facilitate healing and growth. You're not really learning or growing or evolving or developing greater skills or capabilities. You're not expanding your range of motion. Maybe expanding your ass a bit, but or your waistline, but not much else is expanding. And in saying that, I want to be mindful. I'm not intending to shame anyone for their body. I'm just saying we are not in any way doing anything that's, it's not facilitating the healing of our bodies and minds. We're not caring for our bodies. And to a large extent, we're disconnecting from our bodies. We're overloading ourselves. All that stimulus, from our social media, and it's designed to be overstimulating. And it triggers your brain's dopamine reward cycle. And so your mind just continually jumps from one thing to another, to another, to another. So you can't focus. Your attention span just goes to shit. And it's like the stimulus level and all the, television, sitcoms and, television dramas and all the movies and even the nightly news, everything's been ratcheted up, to, like the intensity of video games. Oh, a lot of people spend time gaming too, but it alters the brain's biochemical. I don't want to say balance, it throws it way off balance. And because if you keep stimulating dopamine, then the other neurotransmitters, as that happens, everything goes out of balance, and then it's altering the neurostructure of the brain. So it's like really jacking with us on a number of levels, and all that stimulation, our bodies and minds have to process that, and we can't process it, and so because of that, we can't process the stresses of daily life. We can't process our own emotional responses because our systems are on sensory overload. So anyway, what I'm getting is if you cut down on the amount of all that stimulation, then and you cut down on the amount of time, that's going to give you time easily, another 30 minutes, another hour in your day, maybe a couple of hours time. It's going to free up. You could be doing practice. You could be doing meditation practices, such as those I teach, working constructively with your own emotional responses, healing and digesting your life experiences, your emotional responses, and it's going to get you more present in your body, more grounded. You're going to tap into resources that you need to be more fully functional. You can do yoga, you can do Tai Chi. There's all kinds of things you could be doing to care for yourself. And so, yeah, many of us, we have a lot more time than we would, than we think we do. Again, a lot of people, there's this notion or this kind of fucked up tendency that a lot of people have in our culture is just this thinking of, wanting to get comfortable. And the problem is that we cannot sit still for very long. Either it doesn't mean you have to be in chaos and crises all the time, of course not. But it's so important that we need to be continually striving. We need to be taking steps to heal, to evolve, we need to be challenging ourselves. We need to identify what it is that we want in life, what our goals are, what our objectives. We need to be consistently working to attain or to achieve what it is we want. And we're going to face opposition. We're going to face challenges. That's going to trigger us emotionally. Again, work with the meditation practices that I teach, because it's going to enable you to work through those emotional responses. And I do this all the time. I continually push forward. And when I encounter challenges, blowback, resistance, and it's triggering emotional response, I go into those emotions. I process them. I work with them, work my way through them. As I do so, I gain insight, understanding. It helps me to find the strength, the resources. I tap into the creativity where I come up with workable solutions for the challenges I face. So doing that, I'm continually gaining ground, expanding my range of motion. And then for many years now, I've been, when I can, I'll do deep tissue body work. I'll do other therapeutic interventions like sensory deprivation, flotation tanks. Whatever I could find that's going to help to care for my body and that's going to help to help me to further the processing of my own emotional responses that facilitates healing and growth. But consistently for many years now, I've been going back to the Wichita Mountains to go on the Vision Quest, where I go out those 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water. It was very common that is among the Native Americans, for instance, you would have these some of these very powerful, gifted healers, these traditional doctors, and they would go many, many times through the Vision Quest. Again, go up into the mountains. They're not eating, they're not drinking those 4 days and nights. And by making that sacrifice, there's that. Sometimes other forces, other beings come to them. They receive these gifts of healing that they tap into these powers, these forces that can then work through them that will facilitate the healing in the bodies and minds of others. They receive other kinds of gifts or powers that can assist them in their own lives. So they're continually growing and evolving. And what is it? October? Just how many weeks ago is that? Not that far back. It's December now. So just kind of the latter part of October, I was back in Oklahoma in the Wichita Mountains again. Was this my 61st time to go through the Vision Quest? Sounds like a lot. And I'm not saying this to impress anyone. I don't care about impressing anyone. But for me, there's this knowing that if you truly want to heal, you can't just get comfortable. You just keep taking steps. And all these traditions, like I said, in Sufism, in the yogic traditions, among the those in who attain mastery in the internal martial arts, the traditional Native American doctors, and all these traditions, they wouldn't just do something like the equivalent of a few healing sessions and say, okay, I'm cool now. It's like they would just look at you like, are you fucking crazy? What are you thinking? you just barely stuck your toes in the water. That's what you call dabbling. It's to truly heal. Again, think about it. A lot of us, we suffered significant emotional wounding or trauma, often going back into early childhood. And because we didn't know how to deal with that, we internalized these painful experiences, the emotions attached to those experiences. And we carry that through our childhood, adolescence, into our adulthood. And so there's no way you're going to show up and do like one or a few healing sessions, or if you meditate a couple of times, you think you're going to heal that. That's no, it's not going to work that way. It's like you're just barely scratching the surface. It just, all these traditions, like I said, it was so commonplace. Again, China, India, Tibet, Nepal, all of these, throughout these regions, people would do this intensive practice, various forms of meditation, things like Kundalini, pranayama practice, Qigong practices, other esoteric arts, where they're continually drawing this life force into their body and running it through these various channels, the Qi, the prana. Among the Native Americans, they'd be going on the Vision Quest, the Sundance, and they had other forms of rituals in some of the tribes in the Northeast and on the Northwest and Southwest, other parts down into Central, South America. Native people would work with their traditional doctors over the course of their lives at regular intervals, and not just when they were in the midst of a crisis, but at regular intervals. So healing, spiritual growth, not just spiritual, but spiritually, emotionally, interpersonally, just expanding your range of motion. Now, as I said, sometimes it could be frustrating when I see people and they show up a time or two and they disappear, because I feel the extent of the emotional wounding that they carry and all the stagnation that they hold in their bodies. But there's also just the fact that so many people are just so stunted. They're only realizing a very small degree of their true potential. But conversely, there are individuals I work with. I've referenced a man that I've worked with, and for years, he's also a friend, Troy Helming, for instance. And he's, initially started out, went through a couple of corporate jobs and So always high functioning, highly performing, and yeah, sometimes he would run into corporate politics and get bounced out, and he'd start over in another job. But at a certain point, he realized he wanted to go into renewables, renewable energy. He started laying the groundwork to build what eventually became the largest wind farm in the state of Kansas, but couldn't make the jump from $5 to $50 million in terms of raising capital. And so he sold his interest. He ended up taking that money, building a biodiesel plant, which he operated for some time. And that was marginally profitable. He sold that at a certain point, took what he had, the money he had from that, and then he went into building solar farms, which he's built the solar farms in, I think, 20 something states. And within more recent years, he's developed this technology where he's able to bore through rock and tunnel underground at an accelerated pace that far exceeds other technology that has been utilized for that purpose. And so it's been very fulfilling for me to work with him because he's a prime example. There's many people like him that I've worked with over the years. As we continue to work, it's just going progressively deeper. A lot of the emotional wounding that we carry, all this, the traumas that we've experienced, there's this accumulation, this backlog of all the stress and the emotions from all the hardships, the losses, the struggles that we've gone through. And so as I work with people, it's like more and more of that is being digested, it's being transformed, it's integrated, it becomes fuel for growth. And I watch people develop a greater and greater foundation. They have more resources, they become more and more highly functional and begin to actualize, to realize their true potential. People that maybe are struggling in their intimate relationships. And so I'll see people outgrow these really dysfunctional relational dynamics, the partners, the individuals that they were strung out or on or attached to that caused them enormous stress and pain. They'll let go of those individuals. And as the deep emotional wounds heal, it's like their heart opens in a way that increases their capacity to love and be loved, and they start attracting companions into their life with whom they can co-create more meaningful and more deeply fulfilling relationships. Anyway, so again, just to sum it up, is that healing is an ongoing process. And when you find practices that work, for me, for instance, I started developing these meditation practices in my mid 20s, and I continue to do them. And then later on, I learned Qigong practices. I continue to do them. I found interventions that facilitate healing, the deep tissue body work, when I can work with gifted healers, when I've gone on the vision quest. And so everything that I found that facilitates this, my own healing, growth, and evolution, I continue to do it. And I continue to progress, to advance to higher levels in my own development. And you see the same thing with those who attain mastery. In the internal martial arts, for instance, way up into advanced old ages, they're still in their 80s and 90s, and, longer, they continue to live, and they're still doing practice, continuing to develop that internal power. These Native American doctors, they keep going on the vision quest. And it's in the Hindu Vedic tradition, those yogis, they keep doing the internal practices. And so there's no sense of like, okay, I'm done now. No, it's one continues to take the steps, continues to evolve to higher and higher levels. So said a lot here. It's starting to get dark here, obviously. The sun's going down and it gets dark much earlier in the Northeast in the middle of winter. So I'm going to sign off for now. And I do have limited number of openings, so if you're going through challenges in your relationships not working out quite so well, or maybe you're facing challenges in other areas of life or major health issues or whatever, I'm offering it could be either a challenge resolution or heart-mending strategy session. So, um, so if I could be of assistance, reach out to me. You know, we could take a good 20 minutes. You can share with me what's going on. I can share if there are other resources that I feel will be helpful to facilitate your healing and growth. I'll be happy to share that with you. And if I could be of assistance as well, I'll tell you exactly how I can do so. So, getting pretty dark here. I better be signing off. Bye now.